To the world, Jack and his dog were ghosts haunting the corpse of a town. The man, a vessel of quiet sorrow, moved through the skeletal remains of Salvation Creek with a weariness that had settled deep in his bones. The dog, a German shepherd named Odin whose sable coat was the color of dusk and dawn, stayed so close his body was a constant, warm pressure against Jack's leg. They had paid $120 for this ruin, this collection of sun-bleached wood and shattered glass baking under the Nevada sun. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. But to Odin, who would stop and stare at the crumbling facade of the old general store with an unnerving, intelligent focus, this forgotten place held a $200 million secret rooted in betrayal and murder. A secret that had already killed Jack's best friend and was now coming for him. We are so grateful you've joined us for this story. If our tales of loyalty, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between people and their dogs resonate with you, please consider supporting our channel by subscribing. It helps us continue to bring these stories to light. And we'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let us know in the comments below. The silence in Jack's trailer had a weight to it, a physical presence that pressed down on his chest and stole the air from his lungs. It was the same silence that had followed him home from the arid mountains of Afghanistan, a hollow echo where his best friend's laughter used to be. For 6 years, the ghost of Sergeant Liam Vance had been his only roommate. Liam, with his easy grin and eyes the color of a summer sky, was a constant, shimmering presence at the edge of Jack's vision. He was there when Jack stared into the amber depths of a whiskey bottle, his reflection superimposed over Jack's own haggard face. He was there in the long, dark hours before dawn, his voice a phantom whisper replaying their final, frantic conversation over the crackle of comms. "They're on us, Jack." It was a setup. Thorn. The transmission had cut out, replaced by a storm of static and gunfire that had never truly ended. Not for Jack. He poured another 2 fingers of whiskey, the glass trembling in his hand. His hands, once steady enough to disassemble and reassemble a rifle in pitch darkness, now shook with a tremor he couldn't control. They were good for nothing now but holding this glass, this anchor to a comforting numbness. He was a man adrift, his past a relentless tide pulling him under, his future a featureless fog. He had been a master sergeant in the Green Berets, a man of purpose and precision. Now he was just Jack, a name that felt like it belonged to someone else. Odin, who had been lying with his head on his paws by the trailer door, rose with a low groan. He walked over to Jack and nudged the man's hand with his wet nose, a soft, insistent pressure against his knuckles. Jack ignored him, raising the glass to his lips. Odin nudged him again, harder this time, his whine a low thrum of disapproval in his chest. When Jack still didn't respond, the dog did something he'd never done before. He placed a heavy paw firmly on Jack's forearm, pushing it down until the glass rested on the scarred surface of the small table. He looked up at Jack, his amber eyes holding a depth of understanding that felt almost human. There was no judgment in that gaze, only a profound, unwavering loyalty. It was a look that said, "I am here. You are not alone." Jack's throat tightened. He stared at the dog, this magnificent creature who had been his only constant in a world that had fallen apart. Liam had given him Odin as a puppy, just before that final deployment. "He'll watch your 6 while I'm gone," Liam had said, laughing. Now the dog was all he had left of him. A wave of shame washed over Jack, so potent it made him nauseous. He pushed the glass away. Odin watched him, then let out a soft huff and padded over to the corner where Jack's laptop lay open on a stack of books. He nudged it with his nose, then looked back at Jack, a clear invitation. Wearily, Jack got up and sat down in front of the screen. He'd been mindlessly scrolling through fringe real estate websites for weeks, a bizarre habit born of insomnia. He looked at listings for remote cabins in Alaska, uninhabited islands in Maine, places where the silence might be clean, empty of ghosts. On the screen now was a listing he'd clicked on last night. For sale, ghost town of Salvation Creek, NV. Approximate 10 acres. As is, $120. The price was a typo, surely, or a joke. The photos showed a single dusty road flanked by collapsing structures. It looked like the end of the world, a place where a man could go to finally, completely disappear. Odin whined again, a soft, encouraging sound. He rested his heavy head on Jack's shoulder, his warm breath stirring the hair at his neck. Jack looked from the dog's earnest face to the picture of the desolate town on the screen. Salvation Creek. The name was a bitter irony. There was no salvation for him. But maybe there was an ending. On an impulse that felt less like a decision and more like a surrender, he clicked the Buy Now button. He entered his credit card information, the numbers a meaningless string. $120. The cost of a few bottles of good whiskey. The cost of a grave. A confirmation email appeared a moment later. He was now the owner of a ghost town. He shut the laptop and stared at his dog. "All right, boy," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "You got it. Let's go get lost." 2 days later, his ancient Ford F-150, towing the small trailer that held all his worldly possessions, kicked up a plume of dust as it turned off the paved highway onto a dirt track that was barely a suggestion on the map. The sun was a merciless hammer in the sky. After an hour of jarring travel, a cluster of dilapidated buildings shimmered into view through the heat haze. Salvation Creek. It was worse than the pictures. The wood of the dozen or so buildings had been scoured by a century of wind and sun, warped into shades of silver and gray. Roofs had collapsed, windows were vacant eyes, and a profound, desolate silence hung over everything, broken only by the whisper of the wind through brittle sagebrush. Jack parked the truck in what must have once been the main street. He got out, Odin leaping down beside him. The heat was oppressive. This was a mistake. $120 mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. He could just turn around, drive away, and pretend this folly never happened. But Odin wasn't looking at the truck. The dog was standing stock still, his body rigid, his nose twitching as he tasted the air. His gaze was fixed on the largest of the buildings, a 2-story structure with a sagging porch and a faded sign that read, Vance and Son General Store. He let out a low, inquisitive whine, then trotted purposefully toward it, his tail held low and straight. Jack sighed and followed. He had come this far. He might as well see the full extent of his terrible decision. He stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning in protest. He pushed open the door, which hung from a single hinge, and stepped inside. A thick layer of dust coated everything, dancing in the shafts of light that pierced the boarded-up windows. A long counter ran the length of one wall, a tarnished brass cash register sitting on its end. Shelves stood empty, their contents long since looted or rotted away. In the center of the back wall was a massive stone hearth, big enough to roast a whole pig, its stones blackened with the soot of 1,000 fires. It was to this hearth that Odin went, his claws clicking on the dusty floorboards. He sniffed intently at the base, then began to paw at the keystone, a large, wedge-shaped rock at the very bottom center of the arch. He whined, a note of frustrated urgency in the sound, and looked back at Jack. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked, his voice swallowed by the cavernous room. Odin just pawed at the stone again, more insistently this time, a sharp scratch of nail on rock. A flicker of annoyance went through Jack. It was hot, he was tired, and his dog was acting strangely. But then he remembered the dog's paw on his arm, the unwavering look in his eyes. Odin had pulled him from one abyss. Maybe he was trying to show him something in another. With a grunt, Jack knelt beside him. He ran his fingers over the keystone, felt solid, immovable. But as he pressed along the edges, he felt a slight give on the right side. It was minute, a fraction of a millimeter, but it was there. His curiosity piqued. He went back to his truck and returned with a crowbar. He wedged the tip into the tiny gap and leaned on it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low grinding sound of stone against stone, the keystone shifted. Jack worked the crowbar, leveraging it back and forth until the stone came loose. He pulled it out and set it aside. Behind it was not more rock, but a dark, rectangular cavity. And nestled inside that cavity was a small, heavy box made of tin, secured with a thick leather strap. Jack reached in and lifted it out. It was cold to the touch. Odin sat back on his haunches, panting softly, his eyes fixed on the box as if to say, "There. I told you." The tin box was heavier than it looked, its surface cool and smooth beneath a layer of fine dust. The leather strap holding it shut was brittle with age, but the buckle was a curious thing. A small, intricate combination lock, more modern than the box itself. It was military-grade, a 4-digit pin tumbler lock Jack recognized instantly. He'd seen them on secure footlockers and comms equipment in the field. What was a lock like this doing in a 100-year-old ghost town? The incongruity of it sent a small, unfamiliar spark of intrigue through the fog of his apathy. He carried the box back to the tailgate of his truck, Odin trotting at his heels. He sat on the edge, the metal hot through his jeans, and turned the box over in his hands. His fingers, trained for the delicate work of disarming explosives and the brute force of combat, traced the seams of the lock. For the first time in years, a problem stood before him that wasn't born of grief or memory. It was a puzzle, a tangible thing he could touch and, perhaps, solve. His training, a part of him he had tried to bury, began to stir. These locks had a weakness. If you applied the right amount of tension to the shackle while turning the dials, you could feel a faint click as each tumbler fell into place. It required patience and a sensitive touch. He closed his eyes, shutting out the glaring sun and the desolate landscape. He focused on the faint sounds inside the mechanism, the subtle shifts in pressure. He turned the first dial. Click. The second. Click. The world outside the lock faded away. There was only the feel of the metal, the soft sounds of the tumblers, the ghost of Liam at his shoulder, not whispering of death, but of a shared past. "You've always been better at this stuff than me, Jack." The patience of a damn saint. A faint smile touched Jack's lips. The third dial clicked into place. Then the fourth. With a final, satisfying snap, the shackle sprang open. He took a slow breath and unfastened the leather strap. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of what looked like dried leaves, were 2 items. The first was a photograph, its edges curled and yellowed. It showed a young man, no older than 20, in the high-collared uniform of a soldier from a bygone era, perhaps the late 19th century. He had a serious, handsome face, with kind eyes that seemed to look right through the camera, through time itself. The second item was a journal, its leather cover worn smooth and dark with age. Jack lifted it out carefully. The pages were filled with elegant, looping cursive. The ink faded from black to a soft brown. The first page was dated May 12, 1886. He began to read. The journal belonged to Elias Vance, the man from the photograph, the founder of Salvation Creek. He wrote not of gold or silver, but of building a sanctuary. He had come west after the war, a different war, seeking peace and a place to build a life for his family. He wrote of his wife, Eleanor, and his son, Thomas. He wrote of his principles, a code of honor and duty that felt deeply familiar to Jack. A man is measured not by the wealth he accumulates, one entry read, but by the legacy he protects. There are always vultures circling, men of weak character and boundless greed who see only profit in the works of better men. I will not let them pick the bones of what I have built. I have secured our family's future, not with what can be held in a hand, but with the strength of these hills themselves. As Jack read on, he realized the journal was more than a diary. It was a map. Hidden within scripture verses and poetic descriptions of the landscape were coded directions. Mentions of the shadow of the penitent man at noon, or the path marked by the 7 sisters, were not just flowery language. They were clues. Clues that seemed to point toward the old, abandoned silver mine that honeycombed the hills behind the town. Elias Vance had hidden something he considered his true legacy, and this journal was the key. A new feeling began to displace the hollowness in Jack's chest. It was a sense of purpose, fragile but real. This wasn't just about a dead man's treasure. It was about honoring a promise. Elias Vance, a soldier from a different century, was speaking to him, another soldier lost in the wilderness of his own peace. He felt a kinship with this man, a duty to see his mission through. The vultures Elias wrote of were long dead, but the sentiment remained. Protecting this legacy felt like a way to reclaim a piece of his own lost honor, a way to do something that mattered again. He looked from the journal to Odin, who was watching him with that same steady, knowing gaze. "All right, boy," Jack said, his voice stronger now. "Looks like we have a job to do." The restoration of Salvation Creek was no longer just a way to pass the time. It was a mission. The days that followed fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the demands of the work. Jack's life, which had been formless and stagnant, now had structure. He rose before dawn, the air cool and tasting of dust and sage. He and Odin would walk the perimeter of the town as the sky bled from purple to orange, the dog's presence a silent, reassuring shadow. Then the work would begin. It was brutal, physical labor. He started with the general store, seeing it as his base of operations. He cleared out decades of debris, hauling away splintered furniture and nests of pack rats. He tore out the rotten floorboards, his muscles screaming in protest after years of disuse. He pulled nails, thousands of them, the rhythmic thwack of his hammer a steady beat against the vast silence. He was a man remaking his world, and in doing so, remaking himself. The sweat that drenched his shirt washed away more than just grime. It felt like it was cleansing him of the stagnant poison of his grief. The burn in his muscles was a clean pain, an honest exhaustion that left no room for the ghosts that haunted his sleep. For the first time in years, he slept through the night, a deep, dreamless slumber, with Odin's warm body pressed against the small of his back. He was rebuilding, board by board, nail by nail. He reinforced the foundation, patched the roof against the brutal sun and the slim chance of rain, and began the slow process of fitting new panes of glass into the window frames. He was breathing life back into the building, and it, in turn, was breathing life back into him. Each evening, covered in sawdust and grime, he would sit on the newly repaired porch with Elias Vance's journal. The coded entries were a complex lock he was slowly unpicking. His Special Forces training had included cryptography, and he found a deep satisfaction in applying those long-dormant skills. The River of Sorrows weeps north wasn't poetry. It was a reference to a dry creek bed that ran north of the town. Find wisdom where the earth breathes steam led him to a small geothermal vent hidden among a cluster of rocks. Each clue he solved led him to a physical location, where he would find another small piece of the puzzle, a carving on a rock, a specific compass bearing, a number sequence. It was a brilliant, multi-layered treasure map designed by a man who thought like a soldier. The clues were all converging on one location, the old Serenity silver mine, its entrance a dark maw in the side of the hill overlooking the town. According to the journal, the final mechanism, the entrance to the so-called vault, was hidden deep inside. After 3 weeks of relentless work, the general store was no longer a ruin. It was a rustic, solid shelter. He had a functioning kitchen with a propane stove, a cot in the corner, and a sturdy door that locked. It was more of a home than his trailer had ever been. But his supplies were running low. He needed more lumber, food, and propane. The thought of returning to civilization, even for a few hours, filled him with a familiar dread. The noise, the people, the sympathetic glances, he wasn't ready. But the mission required it. He drove the 90 minutes to the nearest town, a small, sleepy place called Harmony. It was a collection of single-story buildings lining a main street, a stark contrast to the desolation of Salvation Creek. He found the hardware store, Harmony Hardware and Supply, its windows filled with tools and gardening equipment. As he stepped inside, a bell above the door jingled. An old man with a kind, weathered face and hands gnarled with arthritis looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, son?" he asked, his voice a gentle rasp. "Just need some supplies," Jack said, grabbing a cart. He moved through the aisles, grabbing lumber, nails, sealant, and canned goods. He felt exposed, out of place. As he was loading bags of concrete mix, the old man came over. "Building something out there?" he asked, nodding toward the general direction Jack had come from. "Just fixing up an old place," Jack said evasively. The man's eyes, a pale, knowing blue, twinkled. Wouldn't be Salvation Creek, would it? Heard someone bought it. Figured they had to be either crazy or running from something. He chuckled softly. My name's Elias. By the way. Jack froze for a second. Elias. The same name as the man in the journal. It had to be a coincidence. Jack, he said, extending a hand. Elias shook it, his grip surprisingly firm. My granddad used to tell stories about that place. Said the founder, my great-great-grandfather, was a man of principle. Elias Vance. I was named for him. Said he hid the family fortune out there somewhere. Not that we ever saw a dime of it, he sighed. A hint of old sadness in the sound. A young woman with the same pale blue eyes came out from the back room. Dad, did that shipment of fencing come in? She asked, before noticing Jack. Oh, sorry. This is my daughter, Sarah, Elias said. Sarah, this is Jack. He's the fella who bought the old Vance property. Sarah gave him a curious, friendly smile. Wow, brave man. That place has more ghosts than dust bunnies. Jack found himself smiling back, a rusty, unfamiliar movement of his facial muscles. It's keeping me busy. He paid for his supplies, and as Elias helped him load the truck, the old man grew serious. You be careful out there, son. Lately, there's been some unwelcome interest in that land. A slick fella in a fancy suit has been around town, asking questions, poking his nose into county records. He even came in here asking me about the Vances, about the old legends. Gave me a bad feeling. The casual warning landed like a stone in Jack's gut. A slick fella in a fancy suit. The vultures Elias Vance had written about a century ago were circling once more. As he drove back to Salvation Creek, the solitude he had once craved now felt different. It was no longer just a shield, it was a vulnerability. He wasn't just a man fixing a house anymore. He was a guardian, and he had a feeling he was about to meet the competition. A week later, the sleek black SUV appeared. It rolled slowly down the main street of Salvation Creek, its polished exterior a jarring intrusion in the rustic, dust-caked landscape. It parked 30 yards from the general store, and the engine went silent. Jack, who had been on the roof securing the last of the new shingles, froze. He watched as the driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He was exactly as Elias had described. Tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that seemed to repel the dust and heat, with expensive sunglasses hiding his eyes. He moved with an easy, predatory confidence. Odin, who had been dozing in the shade of the porch, rose to his feet, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. The man took off his sunglasses, revealing a handsome, unlined face and a smile that was all teeth. Quite the project you've got going here, he called out, his voice smooth and cultured. Mind if I have a look? He started walking toward the store, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. Jack descended the ladder, his body tense. He placed a calming hand on Odin's back, though the dog's muscles remained coiled like a spring. This is private property, Jack said, his tone flat. Oh, I'm well aware, the man said, stopping just beyond the porch steps, maintaining a non-threatening distance. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a senior partner with Apex Development Group. He extended a hand. Jack ignored it. Thorne's smile didn't falter. He simply retracted his hand and tucked it into his pocket. I'll get straight to the point, mister. It's just Jack. Jack? Thorne repeated, as if tasting the name. My company has been acquiring large tracts of land in this region. We're planning a high-end, sustainable resort community. Your 10 acres are, unfortunately, right in the middle of our proposed footprint. I'm here to make you an offer. He paused for dramatic effect. We're prepared to offer you $500,000. A check could be in your hand by the end of the day. $500,000. The number hung in the air, absurd and unreal. It was more money than Jack had ever seen. It was enough to go anywhere, to start over completely, to buy a silence that was comfortable instead of desolate. The old Jack, the one who had bought this land as a tomb, would have taken it without a second thought. But he wasn't that man anymore. He had a mission. He had the weight of Elias Vance's journal in his mind and the trust of his descendant in the nearby town. "I'm not interested," Jack said. Thorn's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Perhaps you misheard me. That's $500,000 for, well, for a pile of rotten wood and dirt. It's a generous offer. A life-changing 1 inch. The answer is no." Jack's voice was firm. He looked past Thorn, at the hills where the Serenity Mine lay hidden. He was close to solving the final piece of the puzzle. He wasn't walking away now. Thorn studied him for a long moment, his gaze analytical. It was the look of a man assessing a problem, not a person. Odin's growl deepened. "I know who you are, Master Sergeant Jack Riley," Thorn said, his voice dropping slightly. "I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. Green Berets, impressive service record." Until it wasn't the casual mention of his rank, of his past, was a deliberate probe, a subtle display of power. It was meant to unnerve him, to remind him of the failure he'd run from. A cold anger, sharp and clean, cut through Jack. "You should leave," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Thorn held up his hands in mock surrender. All right. I respect a man who knows his own mind. But the offer stands. In fact, let's make it 600,000. Think it over." He gave Jack another one of his empty smiles, slid his sunglasses back on, and walked back to his SUV. As the vehicle drove away, leaving another cloud of dust to settle over the town, Jack felt a chill despite the blistering heat. This wasn't a business transaction. It was the opening move in a war. And Marcus Thorn was not a man who accepted no for an answer. Thorn's polite facade crumbled with the setting sun. The war for Salvation Creek began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, professional acts of sabotage designed to wear Jack down. 2 days after Thorn's visit, Jack woke to find the pump for his well silent. When he went to inspect it, he found the main power line had been expertly severed, not torn by an animal, but cut cleanly with wire snips. It took him half a day in the blazing heat to splice it back together. He had 5-gallon jugs of water stored, but the message was clear: we can take away what you need to survive. A few nights later, he was jolted awake by Odin's frantic barking. He grabbed the heavy mag light from his cot and ran outside. At the far eastern edge of his property, a patch of dry sagebrush was burning, the flames licking hungrily at the arid land, creeping toward the outlying, most dilapidated shed. The wind was calm, but if it picked up, the fire could engulf the whole town in minutes. There was no fire department to call. There was only him. He grabbed shovels and a fire extinguisher from his truck and spent the next 2 hours in a desperate, lung-searing battle, beating back the flames, his face streaked with soot, his arms aching. It wasn't a lightning strike. The sky was clear. The point of origin was too precise. It was another message: we can burn your new world to the ground. He was on edge, sleeping in short, fitful bursts, a shotgun resting against his cot. He spent his days working on the mine puzzle and his nights fortifying his position, his old training rising to the surface like a grim instinct. He set up a simple perimeter alarm using tin cans and fishing line. He cleared brush away from the general store, creating a firebreak. He was no longer a restorer. He was a soldier defending a forward operating base. Then, Thorn returned. This time, there was no pretense of a business deal. The black SUV rolled in at dusk, and Thorn got out, flanked by 2 large men whose ill-fitting jackets did little to hide the bulk of their shoulders or the cold, vacant looks in their eyes. They spread out, taking up flanking positions, their hands never far from their jackets. "I see you've been busy," Thorn said, gesturing to the repaired well pump. His voice had lost its smooth, corporate warmth. It was now flat and cold as slate. "Jack, I'm going to be honest with you because I'm tired of this game. This land is not for a resort. It's for me. There is something here that I want, and I will have it." "I told you," Jack said, standing on the porch, his hand resting casually near the small of his back where he had a pistol tucked into his waistband. Odin stood beside him, hackles raised, a low, continuous growl emanating from deep in his chest. "It's not for sale." Thorn laughed. A short, ugly sound. You're still not getting it. You don't have a choice. You are a fly that has landed on my steak, and I am about to sweat you. Walk away now. Take the money I offered and disappear. If you do, I'll even let you live. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If you don't, you will end up buried out here with the rest of the ghosts. And that sweet old man in town, Elias? And his pretty daughter? Accidents happen all the time in small towns. Faulty wiring. Brake lines fail. It would be a shame. The threat, so casually delivered, landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just about him anymore. Thorn was threatening innocent people, threatening the last living link to the man whose legacy Jack had sworn to protect. The rage that had been simmering inside Jack for years, the rage he had drowned in whiskey, now ignited. It was cold and sharp and utterly focused. You get off my land, Jack said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying more menace than a shout. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Wrong answer. He looked from Jack to the hills behind him, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. You've been in the mine, haven't you? You're closer than I thought, he smirked. It doesn't matter. I'll find it. You have 24 hours, Jack. Then my patience runs out. And you really don't want to see what happens then. He turned and walked back to the SUV, his men falling in behind him. As the vehicle disappeared, leaving only the encroaching darkness, Jack knew the time for puzzles and restoration was over. The final battle for Salvation Creek, and for the memory of his friend, was about to begin. The world tilted on its axis. Thorn's threat against Elias and Sarah, coupled with his mention of the mine, lit a fire under Jack. He had to find the vault. He had to get whatever was in there before Thorn came back with overwhelming force. The 24-hour deadline was not a bluff. He grabbed a powerful headlamp, his pack with water and gear, and the journal. With Odin at his side, he ran towards the dark entrance of the Serenity mine. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of damp earth and minerals. His headlamp beam cut a sharp cone through the oppressive darkness. He followed the final set of directions from Elias Vance's journal, a complex sequence of turns and depth measurements that led him deep into the earth. The path was treacherous, with loose rock and decaying support beams. Finally, he came to a dead end, a solid wall of rock. He felt a surge of despair. Had he made a mistake? He reread the final entry. At the end of the path, trust not your eyes, but the founder's heart, the founder's heart. He remembered the keystone in the hearth. He ran his hands over the rock face, searching for a similar trick. His fingers brushed against a section of rock that was subtly different, smoother. He pushed. Nothing. He pushed again, putting his shoulder into it. With a low, grinding groan that echoed through the shaft, a huge section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a small, man-made chamber beyond. The vault was not filled with gold bars or jewels. It was a simple, dry room about 10 feet square. In the center, on a stone pedestal, sat another box. This one was a modern, military-issue Pelican case, airtight and waterproof. The sight of it made the hair on Jack's arms stand up. This was not a 19th-century legacy. This was something else entirely. He lifted the heavy case and carried it out of the vault, back to the relative safety of the general store. He placed the case on the table he had built with his own hands. He unlatched the clasps and lifted the lid. His breath caught in his throat. Inside, protected by foam cutouts, were not valuables but documents. A thick stack of military files, a black ledger, and a small, encrypted data drive. Jack picked up the top file, his hands trembling slightly. The cover page read, Operation Goshawk, Kandahar Province. His mission. The last mission. The one where Liam had died. His heart hammered against his ribs as he flipped through the pages. After-action reports, patrol routes, intelligence briefings. It was all there. Then he opened the ledger. It was a meticulous record of offshore bank accounts, shell corporations, and wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving through untraceable channels. He picked up the data drive. He had the gear to decrypt it. It was part of his old kit. He plugged it into his ruggedized laptop and set the decryption software running. While it worked, he went back to the files, a sickening dread growing in his stomach. He found a series of communiques, heavily redacted in the official report he'd seen, but crystal clear here. They detailed intelligence being sold to a local warlord, intel about U.S. patrol schedules, troop strength, and vulnerabilities. Intel that had led directly to the ambush of Liam's unit. And at the bottom of a payment authorization, one name stood out, scrawled in a confident hand. Captain Marcus Thorne. The laptop beeped. The drive was decrypted. A folder opened on the screen, containing audio files. He clicked the first one. It was a recorded phone call, the connection scratchy. He heard Thorne's smooth, confident voice. The payment has been received. The intel is good. Bravo 6 route tomorrow is confirmed. They'll be walking right into it. Then another voice, one that made Jack's blood run cold. It was Liam. Thorne, I know what you're doing. I have the proof. The accounts, the transfers. It's over. There was a pause. Then Thorne's voice, no longer smooth, but laced with venom. You stupid, self-righteous fool. You and your whole pathetic family history. Did you really think you could stop me? You just signed your own death warrant. Vance. Liam Vance. The name from the general store sign. The hardware store owner, Elias Vance. The founder of the town, Elias Vance. It all crashed down on Jack with the force of a physical blow. Liam wasn't just his friend from the city. He was a descendant of this place. His family had founded it. The stories the old man told weren't just legends. They were Liam's family history. Before his last deployment, Liam had uncovered Thorne's corruption. He must have known Thorne would try to silence him, so he had taken the evidence. The proof of treason and murder, the key to $200 million in laundered blood money, and hidden it in the one place he knew was safe, the place from his own family's lore. The secret vault in Salvation Creek. He had disguised the modern evidence as an ancient family treasure. Thorne hadn't just gotten Liam killed in an ambush. He had orchestrated it. He had murdered him to cover his tracks and had been searching for this evidence ever since, pressuring Liam's distant, unsuspecting relatives in Harmony, trying to buy the land that held the proof of his crimes. The wound Jack had carried for 6 years, the deep, ragged hole in his soul left by Liam's death, was not the result of the chaos of war. It was the direct result of one man's greed. The antagonist wasn't some stranger. He was the architect of Jack's trauma. This was no longer about honoring a long-dead founder. It was about getting justice for his brother. The ghost that had haunted him for years finally had a face. And he was coming back. The grief that had been a dull, constant ache for 6 years sharpened into a blade of pure, cold rage. The face of Marcus Thorne, his slick smile, his tailored suit, his casual cruelty, was seared into Jack's mind. Every sleepless night, every bottle of whiskey, every moment of despair had its origin in that man's greed. The weight of it all, the staggering fusion of his deepest wound and his present danger, should have crushed him. Instead, it forged him. The broken, drifting man was gone, burned away in the fire of this revelation. In his place stood Master Sergeant Jack Riley, and he had a mission. He looked at the evidence on the table. He could run. He could take the case, drive to the nearest FBI field office, and hand it all over. That was the smart play, the logical move. But Thorne had connections. Thorne had threatened Elias and Sarah. How long would bureaucracy take? Could he be sure the evidence wouldn't get lost in some file room? Thorne thought he was a ghost, a broken man hiding in the desert. He wouldn't expect a fight. He would expect fear. Jack looked around the general store, at the solid walls he had rebuilt, the clean floor he had laid, the sturdy door he had hung. This was his ground now. He had resurrected this place, and he would make his stand here. This wasn't just for Liam anymore. It was for Elias and Sarah. It was for himself. It was a choice to stop running from his past and to use it to defend his future. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and violet. He had maybe 12 hours. Thorne would come at night, under the cover of darkness, expecting to find a terrified veteran ready to flee or be easily eliminated. He wouldn't be expecting a prepared battlefield. Jack's mind, once a chaotic storm of memory and regret, was now diamond sharp. The years of Special Forces training, the muscle memory of tactics and strategy he thought he'd left behind in the dust of Afghanistan, came flooding back. He wasn't just a carpenter anymore. He was a force multiplier. He began to work, moving with a fluid, economic grace he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about seeking vengeance. It was about control, capture, and justice. He would not become the monster he was fighting. His plan was to neutralize and contain. He took the Pelican case with its damning evidence and hid it in a new, secure location he'd prepared, a place Thorne would never think to look. Then he turned Salvation Creek itself into a weapon. He used his knowledge of the terrain, the very layout he had come to know intimately through his restoration work. The main street was his kill zone. The dilapidated buildings were his cover and concealment. The Serenity Mine was his trap. He worked through the twilight and into the night, Odin a silent shadow at his side, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. He rigged a series of non-lethal traps. A tripwire connected to a series of old paint cans filled with rocks in the abandoned saloon would create a deafening clatter, a perfect diversion. He weakened the floorboards in the old assayer's office, creating a pitfall that would drop a man into the shallow, dirt-floored cellar below. He set up a simple pulley system in the mine entrance that, when triggered, would drop a heavy cargo net. These weren't deadly traps. They were designed to disorient, separate, and contain Thorne's men. The final confrontation would happen here, in the general store. This was his castle, his stronghold. He extinguished the propane lanterns, plunging the town into absolute darkness, save for the cold, distant light of the stars. He positioned himself in the second-floor loft he had built, a dark space among the rafters that gave him a perfect vantage point over the entire ground floor. He instructed Odin to stay with him, to remain silent until his command. The dog lay down, his body a tense line of coiled muscle, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark as he watched the front door. Then Jack waited. The silence was no longer heavy with grief. It was alive, electric with anticipation. He was no longer a man haunted by the ghosts of war. He was the ghost, and he was ready to do some haunting of his own. Just after 2 a.m., they came. The low rumble of the SUV's engine was the first sign, a sound Jack heard long before he saw the headlights cut through the darkness. The vehicle stopped a quarter-mile out, and the lights went dead. Smart. They were professionals. Jack watched through a pair of night vision goggles, another piece of his old kit. 3 figures emerged, moving in a standard tactical formation. Thorne was in the center, flanked by the same 2 thugs from before. They moved silently, using the shadows of the crumbling buildings for cover, their weapons held at a low ready. They bypassed the main street, circling around to approach the general store from the rear, just as Jack had anticipated. He had left the back door unlocked, a subtle invitation into his parlor. The first thug, a burly man with the profile of a bulldog, reached the back door and pushed it open slowly. He stepped inside, sweeping his weapon-mounted flashlight across the room. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty space, the counter, the great stone hearth. Finding nothing, he waved the second man in. This was the moment. Jack gave a low, barely audible whistle. From the opposite side of town, the tripwire in the old saloon was triggered. A deafening crash of cans and rocks echoed through the night. The second thug, already on edge, spun around and fired a panicked 3-round burst in the direction of the noise. "What was that?" he hissed into his radio. "Go check it out." Thorne's voice crackled back. "Don't be spooked by rats. Bulldog, stay with me. We clear the main building." It worked. The team was split. As the second thug moved cautiously toward the saloon, Jack watched Bulldog and Thorne enter the main room of the general store. "Upstairs," Thorne commanded. "Clear it." Bulldog moved toward the staircase Jack had rebuilt. As he placed his weight on the third step, Jack pulled a concealed rope. A hidden pin slid free, and the entire staircase, which he had designed to pivot, collapsed with a tremendous splintering crash, dropping the thug a few feet to the floor in a tangle of wood and limbs. The man cried out in pain and surprise. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle. One down. Thorne swore, his composure finally breaking. He spun around, his own weapon light frantically searching the darkness. Riley, I know you're in here. You can't win this. Just give me the drive. Jack remained silent in the rafters. The second thug was now running back from the saloon, drawn by the crash. Boss, what happened? He yelled from outside. Get in here. Thorne's voice was cut off as the man burst through the front door and immediately fell for Jack's second trap. He had replaced a section of the new flooring near the entrance with breakaway balsa wood, covered by a dusty canvas. The thug plunged through it, landing with a surprised grunt in the shallow crawlspace beneath the store. 2 down. Now it was just Thorne. He stood alone in the center of the room, a caged animal, his flashlight beam darting wildly. Show yourself, you coward, he screamed, his voice echoing in the silent building. Jack dropped silently from the rafters, landing behind the long wooden counter. It's over, Thorne, he said, his voice calm and steady. Thorne spun, firing a wild shot that splintered the wood of the counter inches from Jack's head. Jack didn't flinch. He remained in cover. You murdered my friend, Thorne. You murdered a United States soldier for money. He was a fool. Thorne spat, circling the counter, trying to get a clear shot. A sanctimonious idiot who got in my way. Just like you. He lunged around the end of the counter, faster than Jack expected. The muzzle of his pistol was suddenly inches from Jack's face. Thorne's eyes were wide and manic in the gloom. I should have killed you years ago, he hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Now, give me the drive. No, Jack said, his gaze unwavering. Thorne's face twisted into a sneer. Then you can say hello to Liam for me. In that split second, as Thorne's knuckle whitened, Jack gave the command. A single, sharp word. Odin. From the absolute blackness of the loft above, a 75-pound Sable missile launched itself through the air. There was no bark, no warning, just the sound of a large body cutting through the air. Odin slammed into Thorne's back with the force of a linebacker, his jaws closing not on flesh, but on Thorne's gun arm as he'd been trained. The impact sent Thorne staggering forward, his shot going wild into the ceiling. The pistol clattered to the floor. Odin's weight and momentum drove Thorne face-first into the stone hearth, the one where this all began. The man's head connected with the rock with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Odin stood over him, one paw on his chest, a low, triumphant growl vibrating through the silent room. Jack walked over and kicked the pistol away. He knelt and checked Thorne's pulse. It was steady. He was alive. Jack pulled a set of zip ties from his pocket and secured Thorne's hands behind his back. It was over. Justice earned in the heart of the place he had rebuilt, under the watchful eyes of the loyal friend who had led him here. The wail of sirens, growing steadily closer, was the most beautiful sound Jack had ever heard. He had used a burner phone to make an anonymous call to the state police dispatch before Thorne had even arrived, telling them he was a hiker who had witnessed armed men entering the ghost town. Now, red and blue lights washed over the restored facade of the general store, painting the scene in strobing colors. Officers swarmed the area, their professionalism a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. They found the 2 thugs, one with a broken leg and the other covered in dirt, and took them into custody without a fight. They found Marcus Thorne, zip-tied and unconscious, with a large, protective German shepherd standing guard over him. Jack met the lead detective on the porch, handing him the encrypted data drive and a printed summary of the contents he had prepared. Everything you need is on there, he said. Audio files, bank records, military documents. It proves treason, money laundering, and conspiracy to murder Sergeant Liam Vance. The detective, a weary-looking man with tired eyes, looked from the drive to Jack, then back to the scene. You did all this? He asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. I just fixed up an old house, Jack replied. He's the one who broke in. The evidence was ironclad. Marcus Thorne's network of corruption, built over a decade, crumbled in a matter of weeks. The $200 million in laundered assets were seized by the federal government. Thorne, facing charges of treason and murder, received a life sentence in a military prison. His slick suits replaced by a prison jumpsuit for the rest of his days. The news reported that a significant portion of the recovered funds, as a reward for the information, was awarded to the next of kin of the slain hero, Sergeant Liam Vance. A few weeks later, a dusty pickup truck drove into Salvation Creek. Elias and Sarah Vance got out. Elias walked up to Jack, his old eyes wet with tears. He held out a cashier's check. "This is yours," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's more money than my family has seen in 5 generations. You earned it. You brought our family peace." Jack looked at the check, at the staggering number of zeros written on it. He could disappear with that, live a life of ease and quiet. But he didn't want that anymore. He had found his quiet here. He gently pushed the check back into Elias's hand. "No," he said softly. "That belongs to Liam's family. But I do have a proposal for you." Over the next year, Salvation Creek underwent a second, more profound transformation. With the Vance family's funding and Jack's labor, the town was not just restored. It was reborn. The other buildings were made solid and habitable. The saloon became a communal dining hall. The assayer's office became a library and meeting room. They built comfortable cabins where the most ruined structures had once stood. They didn't build a resort for the wealthy. They built a sanctuary for the broken. The sign at the entrance to the town was replaced. The new one, carved from rich, dark wood, read, "The Liam Vance Center for Veterans. A place to rebuild." The final scene of the story is not one of violence or suspense, but of profound peace. Jack, no longer haunted, no longer running, stands on the porch of the general store. He's 50 pounds lighter than the man who arrived here, not in weight, but in spirit. The tremor in his hands is gone. His eyes, once clouded with grief, are clear. He watches as a new group of veterans arrives, men and women with the same haunted look he once wore, stepping cautiously into the quiet safety of the town. Elias and Sarah are there to greet them, their faces filled with a warmth and purpose they hadn't had before. They were a family now, forged in shared history and a common mission. Odin rests at Jack's feet, his head on his paws, his duty done. Jack reaches down and scratches the dog behind the ears, a silent thank you that conveyed everything. He had bought this town as a place to die, but his dog, his loyal, intuitive friend, had known better. He had led him to a place where he could finally learn to live again. In the heart of Salvation Creek, surrounded by the legacy of the friend he had lost, Jack Riley had found his own. In the end, this story is a testament to the quiet power of loyalty. It's a reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds are not healed by forgetting, but by confronting the past and forging it into a purpose for the future. Jack's journey shows us that the act of rebuilding, whether it's a crumbling house or a broken life, is where true salvation can be found. It's about the unwavering devotion of a friend, both human and canine, that can act as a compass, guiding us through our darkest wilderness and leading us back to the light. We truly hope this story of redemption and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog has touched your heart. What part of Jack and Odin's journey resonated with you the most? We would be honored to read your thoughts in the comments below. Please consider sharing this story with someone you think might need to hear a message of hope today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.